Okay.
Right.
Well, yeah. Are you going to give any intro to Jimmy or what?
Yeah, Jimmy will open a meeting, yeah?
Yeah. First thing, Dan, is I wanted to welcome you. Genuinely, it's a privilege to have you along, because you have a fairly unique experience of Chile when it was famous and Chile when it is famous again, or getting famous again. You had the experience of being there in the days of Allende and Pinochet, and working with the working class politically, and also you've been back in this country for over 20 years again, watching the development as it came out of the dictatorship. Main question that we hope that you'll be able to deal with is to update us on how the working class is reviving, how the organizations of the working class. It actually surprises me that there's so many organizations of all the classes, but the working class is a fairly wide menu of organizations across the across the left political spectrum, and I'd hope you might give us some guidance on that. I'd also hope that you might be able to explain to us the understanding that the first referendum, the plebiscite, the way it was organized with what appeared to be left elements that would have been beneficial to the working class, and it was defeated. And then the second one, although I do have an understanding that the second referendum, last year's one, was compiled by friends of the right and rejected by the left, and that the left, to me, it appeared to be a victory, although it appeared to, in the media, be a rejection of the left as well. But there's a lot of little innuendos and a lot of questions that, from this distance, it's kind of hard to understand, and I hope that you'll enlighten us on them. Just for the benefit of the other comrades, Dan has been a member of the British Labour Party for a long time as well, and he has been a member, a very respected member, and a good sparring partner in Labour International, an organisation which grew and blossomed and grew in the period of Starmer, or not Starmer, excuse me, April Carter, in the period when Orban and Orbanism was developing. Labour International grew from a handful of people to a couple of thousand people. That organisation has gone backwards again since, with expulsions, disaffiliations, and people just not bothering anymore. But nevertheless, there is a core of people left who still hold the left ideas and are still prepared to take the risks of membership against the police regime of Starmer. I don't know if I need to say anything more, Dan. Over to you now.
Okay. Well, comrades, I understand you had a good discussion on the Popular Unity movement and its experience. I was in Chile until, well, from the end of '71 until 6 weeks after the military coup. I ran away with my wife to. People said it would have been quite dangerous for me as a foreigner, and in fact, the defeat and the repression was such that very little happened for a good few years after the coup. I'll rush through the history because it helps us understand where we are today. The left revolutionary movement did armed resistance, but that was largely crushed by about 1982. But in 1983, that's sort of 10 years after the coup, conditions for the workers got so bad and the people in general, the level of poverty was such that the popular organizations, with the Communist Party still having a lot of influence, organized mass protests, and there were mass protests began. And at that time, the Communist Party decided it was right to organize an urban guerrilla movement with help from Cuba, and communists who've been trained, had military training in Cuba and fought in Nicaragua and El Salvador, some of them returned to the country. And this movement grew and got support. There was the famous attempt to assassinate Pinochet, the dictator, in 1986. And the growing popular movement led to fears by the part of US imperialism that there could be seriously radical or revolutionary change, and it put heavy pressure on Pinochet for a so-called democratic way out. And Allende's Socialist Party, unfortunately, by this time, most of the leaders had been in exile in Europe or some in Mexico, the USA, and had become very reformist. A party was formed called the Party for Democracy, specifically to work for a democratic transition from the dictatorship, which should have finished when the dictatorship ended, but it continued. So that's another reformist party. The Christian Democrat Party, always generally reformist, was revived with help from abroad. So you had the formation of the Concertación, which was an alliance of reformist parties which agreed the transition away from the dictatorship, and until recently they have been the dominant force on the centre-left, if you like. The pro-dictatorship right-wing parties have continued and still get, for a long time, a surprising level of support, relatively high level of support. And because the Communist Party had taken part in armed struggle, it was shunned, locked out, and not allowed anywhere near representative politics. And Chile, so we've had basically reformist governments, and enough crumbs from the table have been given to the working class and the people in order, until recently, to prevent a social revolt. I remember reading in one of the major capitalist newspapers soon after I returned to Chile in the year 2000, in the year 2001, saying specifically this, that the people had to be given enough to prevent a social explosion. And so that's been the case. Chile, of course, is a tremendously rich country with huge reserves of copper. It's the biggest copper producer in the world now. Huge reserves of lithium, which of course are now becoming more important. And also salmon, farmed salmon is a big industry, forestry, fruit production, and of course wine. So Chile is now a middle income country. The gross domestic, it's grown from about 12 million at the time of popular unity to a population of 20 million. and the gross domestic product is nearly £12,000 per head. That's compared with, in the UK, for example, 36,700, about 3 times as much. But the distribution of that wealth, of course, is tremendously unequal. And it's very apparent in Chile. In Chile, we can identify about 12 families, maybe, that are the real owners of the country, along with most of the copper production is now in the hands of transnationals from the US, from Canada largely, Canada, Britain, Australia, and Swiss capital. I could talk more about the economy if you have questions. But the minimum wage now is about £6,000 a year. A reasonable salary, considered reasonable, is £15,000 a year. And the best paid worker I know, who's a computer programmer, earns about £40,000 a year. The Gini coefficient, I don't know if you know the Gini coefficient, which is a very rough measure of inequality, where 1 or 100, if you like, means that there is total inequality, and 0 would mean that everybody has the same income. In 1987, it was 58, and now that has reduced to 43. Interestingly, in the UK, in 1968, it was 27, and now it's in the region of 32, or sorry, 39, maybe. It's different. 39 was the highest level of inequality it reached, according to these official statistics, in the year 2000. So those are sort of levels. So coming back to the recent period, where the centre-left parties that formed the Concertación, who formed the government from 1990 until the year 2006, when a right-wing president was elected, because they were not solving people's day-to-day problems or economic problems. But from that time onwards, in response to growing popular discontent, the Communist Party was allowed to become part of the governing coalition in the year 2014. But then there was another right-wing government elected, because the progressive program that formed part of the program then was not implemented because of the resistance by right-wing Christian Democrats who were part of of that coalition. So in 2021, we had what was supposed to be a left-wing candidate elected by a coalition of the Communist Party and the Broad Front. The Broad Front are a number of left-wing parties. I would say they're definitely left-wing, but rather middle-class professionals, or middle strata, if you like, form the basis of those parties. They've now come together, in fact, formally, to form a single party. But President Gabriel Boric, received a lot of support from the old reformist centre-left parties as well. And he's been a tremendous disappointment because he's listened more to the reformists and given way to a tremendous extent to the right-wing parties who, because of tactical mistakes by the left, who have a very slim majority in the Congress at the moment. Well, what was the real turning point politically was the social explosion that eventually did happen in October 2019. And there's not one particular cause of that, but it's a combination of the fact that people reacted to the inequality above all in the country, the arising housing crisis with rents going up very quickly, low wages, food costs being high, the visible corruption in politics. Corruption not in the sense of, well, if you look at the reformist parties, it's not that they get amazingly rich, not that they've stashed away millions of pounds, but the fact that their finance, right from the time of the transition from the dictatorship, has come from big business. And if you're financed by big business, you don't fight against big business, basically. And this was only revealed by chance in about the year 2008, when a disgruntled manager of one of the big businesses let the cat out of the bag. And the financing was not only legal financing, but illegal, with a lot of tax evasion involved. The leaders of the big business involved were eventually severely punished by having to attend ethics classes. So it's another of the things that people remember of this sort of an indication of the way that Chile is ruled, in fact. So the actual trigger for the social explosion, you might well have heard, was an increase of fares on the underground, the metro, by 3 pence. And secondary school students started jumping over the turnstiles in the tube stations so as not to pay the fare. And that, in a matter of days, led to that being a huge movement and huge demonstrations starting that expressed all this, the pent-up frustrations because of the exploitation, the corruption, the inequality in the country. And within very few weeks, we had demonstrations up and down the country. On one particular day, there were over 1.5 million people out on the streets. Quite possibly 2 million in a population of 20 million. So up to 10% of the country. In the small town where I now live, I've now lived down here in the south of Chile for 11 years. The small town where I live, a population of about possibly 60,000 now. We had a demonstration of 4,000 people in a traditionally very right-wing area, particularly health workers, education workers. At that time, a new hospital was being built here. The building workers took part. The workers who look after the parking meter system we got here, sort of thing. It was a tremendous mass movement. At the same time, particularly in the big cities, the popular discontent with so many people not in formal employment, in precarious employment, living hand to mouth, day to day. Lots of young people with very anarchist tendencies because of this, because of their revulsion against the system, against the way they're forced to live. There was looting the supermarkets, there was destruction of businesses and so on. And as time goes on, the right wing has very cleverly managed to identify that social explosion with destruction and not with the mass demonstrations of feelings against the education system, against the pension system particularly, a very strong movement against the system here of private pensions. And then we had the, after, once this social explosion had taken, we had in November, a matter of 6 weeks or so after it started, an agreement between all the established parties, if you like, apart from the Communist Party, to have a movement towards the setting up of a system for establishing a new constitution. As it turned out, in my opinion, that system wasn't too bad. The fact that the independents were allowed to stand as candidates, which was one of the major demands of the popular movement. There was gender equality, the same number of delegates elected to the constituent convention as men. The indigenous people had their own had delegates reserved for them. And so there was a big majority, a big progressive majority in that convention. But it wasn't socially really representative of the people in Chile. It was very much biased towards middle strata professionals. I think there was only one manual worker amongst the, was it 150 or so delegates. And they put together a proposal that was very strong on feminism, on autonomy, going right the way through the political system, on identity politics, if you like. I don't like the word woke, but you could almost, you could caricature it as being relatively woke, if you like. There was a call for a part of, a strong part of the proposal was for Chile to be recognized as a multinational country, which was a correct demand, but went very strongly against all the education in Chile, which has been that Chile is one single country, or the nationalist feelings here, undivided. And the bread and butter issues were not strongly highlighted in the campaign. For example, the proposal had a very good section on labor rights, which are very weak in Chile at the moment. But the campaign did not highlight those, did not strengthen, did not feature to any extent at all in the campaign, really. The proposed constitution did not call for renationalization of the copper mines, which would have been a very popular issue, as a result of political negotiations, if you like. So we had a campaign where the mass media in Chile are very strongly pro-imperialist and right-wing, and the campaign against the proposed constitution was vicious. It was an onslaught, and there was lots of money went into local radio adverts, which were lying, and local radio adverts have a very strong influence amongst ordinary people in Chile. Not so many people take that much notice of the television news, although that is very strong. And so the proposed progressive constitution went down to a big defeat, with just 38% of the vote in favour and 62 against. One other factor in this is that voting then was obligatory. And so a lot of people that had never voted, or not usually voted, who have a low political level, if you like, were not very interested, not very aware, but were easily swayed by all this tremendous campaign against it. That defeat had a tremendous effect on people who were very enthusiastic or being very hopeful about all the move following the social explosion. There was discussion groups up and down the country of people talking about what should be in the new constitution, what should be done, how we were going to change Chile, and so on. And the defeat had an enormous deflationary effect on that. And it's only the people with, like myself, well, quite a lot of the older people, in fact, but quite a lot, so obviously quite a lot of young people as well, who have kept the popular movement going, if you like. As Jimmy mentioned, following on from that, the process did not end. There was another election for a second referendum, a second process to write a proposal for a new constitution. By that time, the popular movement was in really deflated. And there was a new situation in Chile as a result of the right-wing president calling for people from Venezuela to come here. A lot of Venezuelans did come here, including a number, not a huge proportion, but a number of the criminal gangs. There are a number also that came from from Colombia, sorry, And Chile has become a more important outlet for drugs, cocaine especially, going to Europe and USA, but particularly Europe. And organized crime has grown enormously in the last few years in Chile. And so when the election came for this second convention, a new ultra-right, openly pro-fascist party called Republicans were strong, and they campaigned purely on the issue of being tough on crime, on security, as they call it. And they got together with the other right-wing parties who were making similar noises. They got a majority on the new convention to write the new constitution. And so what we were presented with eventually was a really extremely right-wing proposal for a new constitution that would have been disastrous had it been approved. Luckily, there was a campaign against it, not as strong as a campaign for the previous proposal, but everybody, from anybody with any reformist point of view, leftwards, was against this, and we managed to defeat it, but only by 55%. 45% of the country in an obligatory vote again voted for a very, very retrograde constitution that would have virtually outlawed strikes across the board. So now we're at a very low level of the popular movement, but it's starting to revive. I was talking to a couple of people from Santiago yesterday, and we feel it here as well in this area. And the issue of Gaza is moving people. There have been big demonstrations in Santiago around the issue. In Chile particularly, we have a very big Palestinian a community of Palestinian descent here. And as is the case across the world, Gaza is really mobilized people and putting more vigor and feeling of people about the need for political change. What we're faced with now, municipal elections and also for regional governors that will take place in October. And so we're starting to organize now around municipal politics, but municipal politics here are heavily politicized, well, as they are in the UK as well. And the left in general, the communists and the broad front are working together in a coalition, if you like, an electoral alliance. We hope to have good results in October, although we are defending a number of seats that were won 4 years ago at the height of the popular movement, if you like. So it's going to be a bit of a battle. I'll leave it there and leave it open for questions. Okay, Roger, Jimmy, rather. There you go.
Okay, Dan, I thank you for that. Just to let you know, Dan, that the format of these meetings is fairly loose. Floor is open to comrades to come in to make short contributions or questions. You yourself, as speaker, maybe call, or if you feel it yourself, you're welcome to come back in to answer a number of questions or add to any points made, and you will still have the right at the end of the meeting to sum up. So with that, I'm going to open the meeting to the comrades. If anybody wants to put their hand up physically or electronically, I'll hope I can catch them. Roger? You're muted, Roger.
Just a very quick question. So two constitutions have been proposed and both were rejected in the election. First was a sort of liberal constitution and then a very reactionary constitution, and both were rejected by the electorate. I'm interested by what you said, that it was obligatory to vote. And that would certainly explain why the first constitution, which had all that huge momentum of the demonstrations and the generally the push for reform, obviously that was defeated by the fact that that those who probably would not have voted according to the usual system were forced to vote, and their reactionary or kind of conservative the conservative vote was
You're muted again, Roger. Sorry.
So the likely result, I mean, the general different things was going to be muted by the fact that people were that the more conservative element were obligatory. It was they were obliged to vote, and they voted down.
Yeah.
But does that mean that the what is the constitution now that it's in force? Is it still one an overhang from the Pinochet period, or what?
Yeah, it's the Pinochet Constitution of 1980, but it has been significantly reformed. It's much better now, but it still includes the neoliberal basis, if you like, in economic terms. For example, a big issue here is the privatisation of water, and the fact that in areas, particularly now the Central Valley, but the area north of Santiago that's becoming semi-desert, a lot of small farmers just can't irrigate their land because they have no water. And they're living right next door to big farms growing avocados that are very green. You get this sort of contrast. So it's freedom for business, if you like, is freedom for private property is written into the Constitution. But in terms of the electoral system and so on, it is much better now. And after these two processes, I don't think we'll see another chance to get a real better constitution for a few more years. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Dan. Thank you. Got to call David next, and then Jabu. David.
Thanks. Excuse me not showing my face. It's a bit of a disorder after a nose job, which was I'm recovering from. Look, just a factual situation. What's the trade union membership like in a proportion on the mines, and particularly in the mines, and elsewhere, maybe in the public sector? And what's the character of the unions? Secondly, the very troubled and extraordinarily long deliberations on the first constitution show the complexity of developing coalitions of all types, of trying to stitch together all the interests of different groups, if we could call it identity politics, as the democratic rights for all sexual orientations and for indigenous people and so forth. But that obviously is an easy target for the right wing, because they, as in the States, you know, they can come back with the anti-abortion issue or something, just sweep away majorities, which have been achieved through very narrow antagonistic electioneering, as you've mentioned, with crime, which of course is rising as throughout the middle income countries. Virtually all are in some state of panic. South Africa is very prominent. And I think it is Ecuador. They've taken, you know, this crime issue is extremely close to everybody. And yet it's being misused for the right wing's relatively easy gains. So it tends to numb, you know, the democratic instinct. And then finally, it seems to me, and maybe you could comment on this, that there are swings and moods which determine the numbers of, you know, in electoral politics. And I wondered what's happened with the mood in the youth, which was so vibrant in the earlier period, and as you talked about, and you know, what is the situation now? Is it disillusionment and feeling that politics is all stitched up and so it's not worth the trouble, or you know, what is the attitude? But thanks very much for a very useful introduction.
Thank you, David. Jabu?
Shall I come back on that, Jimmy?
No, hold on, and we'll let the other speakers in, and then we'll come back to you to take them in block.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction. David is kind of touched on what I wanted to touch on in terms of the Republic. You talked about you were able to really push back on the basis of the rhetoric that they were trying to kind of push as their election campaign on crime. It's really interesting because we are now I'm based in the UK, but I am South African born. We are moving towards the general election, which has been, announced for the 4th of July. So it's going to be really interesting how we push back in terms
Excuse me, Jimmy, but I can't hear a word.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Jabu, could you go nearer to the microphone? You're going very low.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try and start afresh. I was just saying thanks to Dan for the outline of basically how how they have pushed back, especially against the Republican Party, which were using the crime issue as their sort of rhetoric to try and gain sort of populist votes. So then I went on to talk about the fact that we are about to move to an election here in the UK it's been announced for the 4th of July. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the patterns are here. We've had a local election in terms of the councils, and yes, they were using, bringing more police into the streets. And this was prevalent with both major parties, which is the Tory party and the Labour Party. Another one that I wanted to bring up, you talked about, you've got a very prominent Palestinian, people that have existed in Chile for a while. I just wondered what their involvement was in terms of leading the sort of like, campaigns around Gaza in terms of the communities in Chile. Thank you.
Hey, Jabu. Ian?
I think that might have been a mistake. I would my thumb up for the last point on the Palestinians in Chile from Jabu. But since you called me, I'll just add to that on that same issue. I was going to put it in the chat. I know it's the biggest Palestinian community outside the Middle East. In fact, one of the presidential candidates, Hadwe, Palestinian and a member of the PFLP until switching to Chilean politics after Oslo. I don't know if he's still got as much of a chance. It's a shame he lost out to Boric, who's made a lot of mistakes. But I was wondering if, with such a big community, what's CAST and the right's position on Palestine? Can they afford to be as ultra pro-Israel as the guy across the boundary in Argentina who's said Netanyahu's done absolutely nothing wrong and wants to move the embassy to Jerusalem like Trump did? Or would that be electoral suicide in Chile? So yeah, maybe the Palestine movement might make a CAST victory less likely. Let's hope.
Dan, do you want to respond to those comments? Dan?
Hello, my connection's unstable now. I hope you can you now?
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
I mean, sorry, I missed most of Jabu's comments and the last speaker. I'm in a rural area. My connection is by telephone, and I'm in a beautiful area which is touristy. When the tourists wake up, they I often suffer with a bad reception. Yeah,
both Jabu and Ian were interested in the situation relating to Palestinian relationships with Chile and the attitude of the government there to the Palestinians themselves.
Sorry about the Palestinian community here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've gone. I've gone again.
No, we can hear you again. Your voice is clear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're clear, Dan.
No. Damn. Damn and blast.
We heard that.
Dan, we can hear you okay.
I think he can't hear us. That's a problem.
Look like it, does it? Oh dear. Yeah, we've lost him, haven't we?
It's gone altogether. Does any comrade wish to come in with anything that they may have to condense and repeat for Dan if we get him back? No, he's here again.
Hello, I'm back again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you, Dan.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Do you wish Jabu and Ian to summarise again for you?
I keep freezing. I keep losing you. Maybe if I join.
Is it worth leaving and rejoining, Dan? Dan, is it worth leaving and rejoining?
I've left and rejoined several times.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to connect on my phone now because that might be better.
Yeah, leave your picture off. That might help. Okay.
No, we can hear you clearly, Dan, if you wish to continue.
Oh, I do.
I was going to ask you, would it be helpful to you if Jabu was to give a very brief summary of what she said so that you could hear her questions?
Well, can I first respond to the bit about unions while you can hear me?
Okay.
The union movement is quite weak here relatively, although, as in Britain and other countries, much stronger in the public sector. So it's quite a strong federation of government unions, government workers. Health workers are largely organised but divided. There are several national federations of health workers. Education, there's the teachers' professional college, that's how they're organised here. And recently, in response to the lack of progress on the reforms that were promised in the government programme, the major trade union federation, the unitary centre of trade unions, called a one-day strike, which was quite well supported, particularly in the public sector, as I say. Mining unions are strong, but miners are now divided amongst a proportion of permanent, relatively well-paid mine workers who have a strong reformist tradition in their unions, and a greater number of subcontracted workers in more precarious conditions, much lower wages. And they were organised for a time. At the moment, I don't think their organisation is so strong because leaders can be picked off there and so on. So, I mean, that's the situation there. In the private sector, I've seen a number of strikes over the years here, but very often defeated because workers will come out on strike even when they're in a minority, and workers that aren't organised or in separate unions, because the dictatorship made it very easy to form different unions in the same workplace or the same company. And so for those reasons, to a large extent, unions have not been so strong. Crime is a very big issue. And what there is not so much awareness of or campaigning around is the fact that I keep repeating that if you look at statistics, sociological statistics, there's a very close relationship between inequality in a country and crime level. And that's very true in Chile. In Chile, we can see that there's 2 municipalities, or 3 in reality, 3 municipalities where the rich live. They're concentrated. They have lovely houses, big houses, huge gardens, swimming pools, green areas, and so on. You can see it on the satellite photos. And everybody knows about this. This glaring inequality is there for everybody to see. And on the other hand, you have large areas in Santiago of people in tiny houses that were built as social housing. They're not council houses because the people own them themselves, so they have to do all the maintenance themselves. During the dictatorship, there were hundreds of thousands of these houses built that are very small, crowded together, no green areas, and young people from those areas, because of the stigma attached to them, find it difficult to get any sort of permanent regular jobs. And so you have a lot of young people that are very disillusioned, very prone to anarchist ideas. They want to destroy the system and so on. And that is a huge problem. And many of them, of course, turn to crime because that's the easiest way they have to make a living, basically. And that's true to an extent. The young people that were involved in the social explosion, many of them are still disillusioned, but at the moment in Chile, in the short term, the way forward is to win reforms through electoral activity, and with the forthcoming municipal elections, many of those we hope will be drawn back into some activity. Okay, is there anything else, Jimmy, that I could refer to, that I should refer to?
There was a question I wanted to ask that's kind of related to that, Dan. That is, again...
I don't know if you've heard everything I said.
I heard you clearly all the way through, Dan. But there's a question I wanted to ask you in relation to the youth training, where youth are in work. And I'm thinking of this, for example, apprentices. Are the young workers in training regulated? Is their educational content regulated? Have the unions any involvement in that training? And is the training carried out by the state or by the private sector?
That's a very good question, because in terms apprenticeship is that sort of idea, if you think, if you like, is not really, I don't know of anything like it in Chile. There's a large number of private universities and private training institutes, if you like. There are far too many graduates produced in professions like psychology, anthropology, journalism, who will never get work in those areas. And that's part of the reason for the broad front, if you like. A lot of young professionals who end up in a very precarious economic situation. And there's a shortage of technical training, if you like. So there are institutes that deal with education of electricians, plumbers, and so on, who, with a qualification, generally do get jobs. There's a real shortage of good electricians, for example. I've done a bit of electrical installation because I've sort of trained myself a bit, and I've seen the work of some people who call themselves electricians here who do the most horrendous jobs, you know, because of the lack of technical training to quite an extent. And the unions, as far as I know, have virtually no input. They might have, but I don't know of anything like that.
Okay, Dan, that sounds sad. Pity I'm not still on my tools. I'll go over and train them. Jabu, you have your hand up again.
Huh?
Yes, it was.
You've gone again. You're frozen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
No, Dan said he's gone again. Dan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. it was really to go back to my question, which was really joining on David's crime issue. But for me, it was really the strategic point of view defeating the Republicans who were using the crime issue to, to get populists to get behind them. You said you pushed back and you managed to get 55%. But also Ian joined me with the Palestinian question, because I recognize that you said there's quite a big population from the Palestinians who are settled in Chile. So I wondered what role they were playing in terms of the sort of campaigns around their movement. Are they freely able to campaign and fight for the Palestinian plight, or is there a precarious position with them in Chile in terms of being able to express their own concern about what is happening in Gaza and Rafah?
Yeah, the Palestinian community here is interesting. When I was in Chile 50 years ago, they were largely in business. They're not a poor community in general. They're in the textile industry to a large extent, and hardly involved in politics at all. Now they're very prominent in politics. A lot of the politicians are from the Palestinian community. And the Palestinian community in general they've been very active on the whole issue, taking part, organizing demonstrations and so on. And because of their role, which, I mean, there are, possibly the most popular politician on the left here is called Daniel Jadwe, who is from Palestinian community, who is the communist mayor of a municipality, a borough in Santiago, who has been very active, very creative and so on, and has created a very strong support for himself across the country. But there are quite a number of right-wing politicians from the Palestinian community as well, who largely came here around the time of 1912 to 1920, that sort of time. So they've been in Chile a long time, and Chile has recognized Palestine as a state, I think, thanks to their influence. After a campaign, Israel was not allowed to participate in the big arms fair that's held here every year, a couple of months ago. But our politician, our president, elected on a left-wing platform, is generally very pro-imperialist. So he's not slapped a ban on total cooperation with Israel in terms of the armed forces. The armed forces have had quite close relationships with Israel. So he's not stopped that. He's not stopped diplomatic relations. And so there's still quite a lot of work to be done. But no, the Palestinian community, they're still relatively well off, a lot of them, and very active. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ian?
Yeah, just to repeat my kind of follow-up question to Chabu, because I think Dan was away when I asked it about the right wing in Chile. Will the Gaza movement, given the size of the Palestinian community in a relatively small country overall, make it either harder for someone like Cast to win, or indeed is Cast as outright pro-Netanyahu as Milei in Argentina is almost ludicrous extent? or would that be something that no Chilean politician could afford to be? Yeah, so basically about that, will it blow up in the right faith? And yeah, hopefully it will blow up in Millie's face too, but you know what I mean, especially with the size of the community. And I think you were right about Tadley. I think it was a pity that Boric beat him in the primary and a much more soft-led leader.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think I'd be very hopeful of the fact that the Gaza issue, although the television here, including the national television station, which is supposed to represent all points of view, has been very bad in its coverage of Gaza. But even so, something manages to get through, and there is general recognition of the genocide and the horrendous conditions. And yeah, I'm quite hopeful that will rebound against Cast, who was the Republican candidate in the last presidential election. And I think it should do so in the case of Milei in Argentina as well. Yeah.
Okay. Joe?
You're muted, Joe.
Joe, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm on my mobile phone here. It's the first time I've attended a Zoom meeting on a mobile phone, so the controls are a bit different, a bit more awkward for me to find.
We can hear you anyway, Joe.
Yeah, you can hear me now. Yeah, I'm not going to shed too much light. I might even shed more grayness on this. What's alarming me is that here's a country with a tradition of revolution, a tradition of strong left-wing parties, and we have a situation where union membership is at a very, very low level. Activity within the union seems to be low as well. So what I'm going to try and grasp at is a few straws here. I'm going to just ask for a little bit more elaboration in relation to the young people, and if they're looking towards anarchist circles, what exactly are the anarchist circles proposing? Do they try to ignite any social campaigns, link with other groups? That's one. And the second thing is the general levels of class consciousness. I would imagine the levels of class consciousness are quite high, given the polarity between the rich and poor there. So the potential there is huge, and yet we have the contradiction that the in terms of organized force, the organized forces are very, very at a very low level, despite the levels of conscience being high. So that's a contradiction which maybe needs to be explored a little bit more. Even within Ireland, with a population of around, the Republic of Ireland is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. I think we're number 2 or 3 behind Switzerland. But we have a workforce here of nearly 2.4 million, I think it is. Jimmy might correct me if I'm wrong, but 2.4, 2.5 million in a population of 5.5, 6 million. And the majority of those people at work would probably identify broadly with the idea that they're members of the working class. So I would imagine in Chile, what we need to do is just examine a little bit more in relation to the class conscience, given the history of Chile, and then the alienation of the younger generations from the legacy of that revolution, and what they make of it, because that would be an interesting question. What do the young people from working class backgrounds make of the heritage of 1970 to 73? Is there a fear in relation to the return of the generals or whatever? There's just so many questions which need to be asked and need to be answered in relation to that discrepancy between the heritage, the class consciousness, and the actual organized forces. And I know disillusionment is a process that took place over 20, 30 years, and especially the last 10 years. And finally, just to finish then, those societies where crime is a major issue, South Africa, Russia, Ecuador, other places, it's because people have been let down, and when there's a lack of a vision of solidarity, a lack of a vision of a better society, and no way forward to try and tackle equality except through trying to grab what you can and trying to survive in the way that you can as an atomized member of society, crime will rocket in those circumstances. And of course, the people who have something, even if it's something very, very small, are very prone and much prey to wanting to hold on to what they have without being hassled, and then they can turn to the right in relation to crime. So I know I've covered I've pressed a lot of buttons there, and I apologize for that. Thanks for the contribution so far. And I apologize in case I missed the first 10 minutes and maybe you referred to some of the points I've made in your opening 10 minutes of your contribution, or your opening 5 minutes of your contribution. So, Sinead, okay, thank you.
And if you want to go back, Joe.
Sorry?
I'm asking Dan if he wants to respond to you.
Yeah, well, Joe said she wanted to come in on something. You want to get her in, or shall I respond quickly to that first?
Yeah,
As you see fit.
Joe, it will be after you respond. It's fine. This was for later. Thank you.
I didn't hear it again, Jabu.
I was saying respond to Joe, then I'll come after. This is unrelated to what we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Chile did, I mean, first of all, under the dictatorship and the opening up of the country with neoliberal policies, a lot of industries virtually disappeared here. The textile industry and a number of others. But of course, we still have the mining, as I've mentioned, salmon production, fruit and so on, a lot of rural industries. And there's still a hangover from Chile of the situation prior to the 1960s, when big landowners were acted in like semi-feudal lords. And so a lot of people are very submissive. You know, there's a tradition of this submission to the lords. Not, although with the agrarian reform and the formation of agricultural unions, there was an upsurge of reaction to this. But there's still people who are, as Roger said, conservative, don't like to see radical change or upsets or whatever, even though they're living in real poverty. And that helps explain why unions are still quite weak, although unions generally exist where you have workers organized. And as I've mentioned recently, there's been a general strike. Unions are again coming to realize that, you know, we have to have struggle in order to get anywhere. But it's a very mixed picture, very mixed. And the other, I mean, the level of class consciousness, I would say, is still quite low. The dictatorship had a tremendous effect of causing fear, and it took a lot of courage to fight against it. And so many young people now know very little. They know very little about the history because it's been suppressed It's just not been mentioned. I just heard on television recently someone who was a journalist in one of the few periodicals that were published during the dictatorship that were critical, that were fighting against the dictatorship. And they were often imprisoned, closed down, but reemerged again. And with the transition to a bourgeois democracy, he thought that those journals would be supported, they would be get government advertising to support them and so on, and not at all. They were virtually closed down. So the mass media, since the time of 1990, has been in the hands of big business. And my wife and I here, talking to young people, found recently a number of young people that know nothing about the scale of repression, what happened during the dictatorship. And so there's a huge amount of political work to be done. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dan. Gabu, do you want to have one more try with your question, Derek?
Gabu, is you muted?
While we're waiting on Jabu, I have a question for you, Dan, and it's kind of related to where you finished off. That is not just the loss of consciousness or the unawareness or ignorance of the younger people. The question is, does the shadow of the army, the history of the army, hang over the leadership of the working class? And are the armed forces themselves, is there any element or illusion of independence in terms of their own autonomy, their own decision making? And is there any open connections with the likes of the CIA and the international capitalism? And finally, question of whether or not there is open far-right political organizations.
Yeah, the armed forces. I mean, that's for a chance of real radical, let alone revolutionary change in Chile. The armed forces are going to be a tremendous problem, because at the time of the military coup, there were quite significant sectors of the army, at least, and some in the Air Force, not so many amongst the officers in the Navy, but certainly in the army, there were a lot of democratically minded officers that supported, they weren't necessarily socialists, but they supported the idea that Allende, for example, was constitutionally elected and should have the right to continue. Since the military coup, and even after the coup, there were some of the left-wing parties hoped that possibly they might have some influence and that they could form part of opposition to the fascists and help to overthrow it. But since the coup, the armed forces have been, entry into the armed forces has been very strictly monitored and controlled. Even to the extent of young people doing military service. I know several examples of sons of friends of mine and my wife who volunteer to get their to do their military service. But when they find out who their parents are, they for some reason are not allowed, not admitted, even to do the 2-year military service. And as far as getting into officer training programs, their families are scrutinized, and anybody without an unblemished family history is not allowed into the armed forces. So they're very heavily reactionary now. It's going to be a major problem. Yeah, and the other point was, what did you mention, Jimmy?
About the independence of the military in relation to the likes of the CIA, whether there are open links.
Yeah, of course. And so the military has very strong links with the US armed forces, hold joint exercises all the time. I'm sure that the military intelligence has very strong links with the US military intelligence, share information and so on. Yeah, they're totally integrated there.
Okay, Dan. I noticed on the chat that Jabu has a request to comment again. So,
yeah.
You want to fire away, Jabu?
Yeah, no, it was really sort of to tell everyone that I have been asked to stand in Oxford in the general election. So I'll be I'll be standing for the seat of Oxford East, which is a seat that is being currently held by Annalise Dodds. A lot of you will know her. She's the Shadow Minister for Equality, and she's the chair of the National Labour Party. So I wondered if any of you would comment or would want to get involved with this. There's quite a lot of work being done in terms of trying to bring in a lot of left movements right across Oxfordshire, because during the local election, we had quite a polarizing agenda in terms of different strands standing, like Task, standing in different areas where independents were standing. So working hard to pull everybody together so that we can all, stand on a united force. A lot of people are really disgusted by Annalise's stand, especially in support of Kestama and the statements that were being made around condoning Israel's action. So the central focus for our campaign will definitely be to challenge what is happening in Gaza, and also a lot of issues around the NHS pay.
Sorry, Jab, could you talk a bit louder, please? I can't hear you.
Oh,
And what area are you talking about?
Did you get anything I said?
Yes, most of it.
It's a bit of a struggle, Jabu. You're still very weak.
Can you hear me now? I'm shouting.
Yes.
I'm so sorry about I don't know what's happening with my speaker. But what I say, to sum it up, so that I don't know what everybody got, but I've been asked to stand in Oxford East for the parliamentary seat of which is currently being held by Annalise Dodds. She's a former Shadow Chancellor under Stammer. She is the national chair, and she's now the shadow cabinet for equalities. But a lot of people are quite disgusted by her stand on a lot of issues, especially the Palestinian. She is supportive of Stammer's statements, and we have had quite a lot of issues with regards to her lack of support for union rights, and are standing on a picket line. So we are just basically using this platform so that we can really focus on all the issues that we feel the Labour Party is failing us, and it's an opportunity that won't be there if we don't stand, because there aren't many people that are willing to stand on a left candidacy. So we are realistic that we might not win, but we want to really push so that we can, at least do something to have majority. Thanks.
Okay, Jabu. I have to admit I did lose a little bit of that again, but most of the comrades seem to have got it. David, I noticed also on the chat you mentioned about Marcia in Namibia. At the end of the meeting, I'd ask you if you could make a contribution on that particular point again, because it is important. Roger?
Yes, I was going to make that point that there's a lot to talk about in relation to the British general election and in relation to the struggle of Marcia in Namibia. But can I suggest that we leave some time at the end of the meeting for that? But I think we shouldn't get diverted from the discussion on Chile. We can finish that off first.
So I was going to ask any comrades, because we're coming near enough to the end of the normal time, if anything is normal these days. If anybody has any last questions or comments for Dan, can you just give a signal now? And other than that, we'll ask Dan to come back to summarize the event itself and the contribution. No.
Okay, shall I wind up? Yep.
Okay, you're on your own, Dan.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation. It's been an interesting discussion. Maybe something I should have said at the beginning, but as a sort of summary, when I was in Chile from 1972, 73, there was a real hope of revolutionary change, of progress towards that. In fact, there were one of the problems is that there were two revolutionary strategies, if you like, and there wasn't unity about that. At the moment, the left is still divided, but there isn't any real revolutionary strategy. The most we can hope for at the moment is moving towards some really significant progressive reforms which can lay the basis for developing people's ideas as to the possibility, as to the need for revolutionary change away from our neoliberal system. I'm afraid, the Communist Party is very different from what it was when I knew it. The effects of the defeat of socialism in the Soviet Union and so on had a big effect here as it did elsewhere. And so the Communist Party here now it's the biggest party recorded. It's quite strong in membership, but it's not as politically strong as it was 50 years ago. So that's where we are. We're at a fairly low political level, but there's still the remnants here. And compared with Britain, the left is far stronger here than it is, I feel, in Britain. The hangover, the remnants, if you like, of the memory of those revolutionary struggles are still here. But for the new generations, it remains to win them to new ideas. So there we are. I hope I've given you some flavor of the situation here anyway. Thanks again.
Personally, Dan, I found your contribution excellent, very wide-ranging, and at the same time had a depth that shows your experience and understanding. So on behalf of the meeting, I thank you for it. And the other thing I would say is, given your understanding of the international situation, you're welcome to join us any Sunday and every Sunday, if possible. That you could, I'd like to think that you could participate in the exchange of ideas that we have on this site. And if it's okay with you, we'll send you notices of the meetings.
Certainly.
Lovely.
Okay.
David, I want to call next in relation to Namibia.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jimmy. Look, I think all the comrades are aware that, we are developing a campaign internationally for Marcia K. I won't try the full surname because it's quite a challenge, even to local people, but who is struggling for reinstatement after telling the truth about the conditions at her workplace. Comrades, you will have received, at least please say if you haven't received, an appeal which relates to her case, and messages of support sent to the Ministry of Labour and to the employer and to Marcia herself would be much appreciated. All forms of support we can give are what we need right now. Please indicate if you do not know about this, and we'll certainly give you the details. But Roger has circulated internationally. I hope everyone should have seen this by now. Many thanks.
Okay, David, thank you. And yet again, we express our continuing support for Marcia and the struggle she's involved in. Roger, you wanted to come back on Labour Party?
Yes, well, I wanted to say that, first of all, of course, the fight is really on in Britain now with the declaration of the general election, and it's very good news that Jabu is standing. I'm sure she'll raise the banner, and I think we can be confident she'll get a lot of support. But there are also actually a large number, I think certainly over 100, maybe 200, I don't know, but there are a lot of left or independent candidates who are standing because of the complete the fact that the Labour Party is now indistinguishable from the Tory party in terms of its policies, and there is I think we're in the stages of the beginning of the coalescence of the foundations of a real workers' party. It'll take time. It'll take the election, first of all, of a Starmer government, which is pretty well inevitable, and I think then there'll be growing pressure and a growing momentum to say that the workers' organisations will have to abandon the shell of the Labour Party, which has been completely emptied out of any kind of content for the working class, and to create, as they did in 1900 when they formed the Labour Party, to break away from this shell of a Labour Party and form a mass party of the working class. And in relation to that, there are now actually too many left candidates now standing, or independent, or for instance, in Newham, my borough, we have 3 constituencies, and we have at least 7 or 8 or 9 people who've declared that they want to stand to put forward a left alternative. And the task now is to get an agreement that we have a hustings, that we take a democratic vote on which 3 candidates we want to put up, and make sure that there is 1 candidate per seat, and the best ones, the ones that will put up a real fighting and militant challenge to the ruling class. So there's got to be a lot, and we're going to have to spend time at WIN meetings in the near future to report on this and to mobilise and to get support. I hope that comrades will be able to travel to Oxford, to Newham, and to many other places including also Islington, where Jeremy Corbyn has finally got off the fence and declared that he is going to stand as an independent. And I would say sort of watch this space in relation to that. Can I tell you something about future meetings now of WIN?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, if you give the notice on the next couple of meetings.
Right. Well, we now have things lined up for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and it's a good program. Next week, we're having we're very honoured to have once again Michael Roberts, really the leading Marxist economist in the world, who's going to talk about the beginning of a trade war that has been launched, particularly between the USA and China. The USA has slammed huge tariffs on the export or the import from China of electric vehicles and other such goods. I think 100% tariffs, and it's the beginning, or could well be the beginning, of a trade war, which would mean really a decline into economic recession as in the 1930s. So Michael Roberts will be talking about that next week. We also have lined up for the following week, the IMF has introduced a swingeing and drastic attack on the Sri Lankan population, and in terms of a new program, forcing absolutely swingeing cuts. And we've got, once again, if comrades remember, we had 2 very good speakers from Sri Lanka a few months ago, a trade union leader, Swastika, and an economist, Anusha. They're speaking. Then the following week after that, again, a great honour, we've got John Dunn, the heroic veteran of the miners' strike, will be speaking on the anniversary of the British miners' strike. It's particularly timed because it's close to the anniversary of the big Battle of Orgreave, which was a landmark in that struggle. And then we have other meetings lined up anyway. I won't go on anymore. But I do think it's very good to see all the comrades here, but I hope you'll come regularly, and also I hope that we can attract more comrades to come. It'll be more difficult in Britain because of the election period, but really these speakers deserve a really wide audience among worker militants. Of course, we have the YouTube channel, so it's always possible for comrades to catch up and watch meetings that they missed. Thanks, comrades.
Okay, comrades. One of the other things, Roger, that we also have to face is that most of Europe is involved in either local or European elections. So there's a lot of distractions out there at the moment on the time of an activist. With that, comrades, I'd like to thank everybody who is present, and hope that I just advise anybody who did have trouble with the meeting, let's get it started with. It has been recorded, so if anybody wants to go back and see what they lost, it's there for them. After that, I would say thanks everybody, and see you next week.
Right.
And special thanks to Dan again.
Yeah, thank you. Very good.
Thank you, Dan.